Hello, Flowgraders. This is Max Gottster, and welcome to another episode of the Flowgrade Show. Today, you will learn what it takes to become a bodybuilder, what diet works best to effectively build lean muscle, what kind of supplements you should consider taking, and how you can effectively and naturally increase your testosterone level. You will learn this from one of the most renowned fitness and nutrition coaches in the world right now. His name is Ben Greenfield. He's been a speaker at the Biohacking Conference last year. He is the author of a New York Times bestseller called Beyond Training, and he has coached many people about how to turn into fat-burning machines. So I'm very thankful to have him on the show to share his knowledge. He is notorious for going into a lot of details. So in case you missed something, then go on flowgrade.com where you will find more information on this podcast, links to the studies and methods, and a whole lot more. So now stay tuned. Without further ado, here is Ben Greenfield. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. All right, and it's a little bit it's a little bit of an honor to be talking. Do you primarily have a German audience or U.S.?
Well, I'm targeting mostly the German-speaking market, so okay. Austria, Germany,
because
Switzerland.
I don't speak a lick of Austrian, German, Swiss. Gosh, let me think if I know any words in Switzerland. I don't know that I do. I can fake it, I guess, but ultimately, my apologies for my complete and severe lack of German, Austrian, and Switzerland to your listeners.
No worries at all. You know, this is probably too much to ask. It's not an easy language, even though I know you're a competitor and you probably could pick it up quite easily if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's the problem with living in the era of iPhones. Now, when I travel, I understand that, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor release, similar to learning music that occurs when you learn language. But it's so easy now to just take out your iPhone or even my Kindle and have it tell me how to communicate in a certain way or how to say something, and I'll find myself sometimes saying something and I don't know what it means grammatically. It's just what my iPhone told me to say, and so that it almost allows for a certain amount of language laziness these days.
Yeah, our kids are probably going to grow up with real-time translation devices.
Yeah, and I have my kids in Spanish because, again, I understand the neural network building that goes on with language learning, but at the same time, let's be honest, they probably aren't going to need it, from a practical standpoint.
Well, then they have more time to focus on other things, which is also not so bad, maybe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Ben, actually, speaking of kids, I wanted to start with maybe your personal story of how you got where you are, because I know I talked to a couple of people in preparation for this podcast, and I actually got this story by your friend Brock, who told me that, he remembers you in Thailand in a cab, writing an article, driving like crazy through the streets, and he was just looking out the window and trying to process everything that was going on, and you were working. So
yeah.
You have the reputation in the field of just being, on top of your things, high energy, always on top, Ironman, marathon runner and triathlete. And I just would be interested in, were you always like that?
I wasn't really. I grew up more of not a sedentary kid, but a little bit of a geek. I was very into World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, fantasy. I played violin. I was president of the chess club. I was not one of those kids who you would consider to necessarily be like a jock or a sporting enthusiast or a fitness freak or anything like that. I remember when I was a kid, my parents did put me into sports like soccer and basketball and stuff like that, and I was okay. I wasn't that competitive. I was kind of like one of my sons is. I was out there more to have fun, and it was difficult for me to really get like that bloodthirsty competitive drive. And even though I still I still love competition. A big part of what I do in terms of like triathlons and, ultra endurance events and Spartans and all these other things. I enjoy the competition. It drives me a great deal, but I also enjoy just as much the process, right? What your body becomes and what your brain becomes as you train for one of these events, and the journey just as much as the destination. However, when I was a kid, I guess I was about 13 years old when I finally found a sport that I really liked, and that actually got me doing things like running hills and going to the sporting goods store and buying little 10-pound dumbbells that I could train with, and that was tennis. So tennis is what really got me kind of interested, not just in playing sports for the fun of it, but in literally training, physiology, fitness, nutrition, balance and speed and movement and agility. And I kind of stuck with that all the way up until college, and wound up playing collegiate tennis and continued to really fall in love with the human body. Went from being a kid who would like win magazine essay writing competitions and love to do creative writing, poetry, watercolor paintings. I would go around to the local nursing homes and play my violin over the Christmas holidays. And I instead went from being someone who kind of sucked at math and science to being a standout student. 4.0 GPA in all of my math and my science courses, because I just fell in love with physiology, and specifically the physiology of training. Like, there's this concept of bro science, right? So during college, while I was a tennis player, I was also doing a lot of training. I eventually burnt out on tennis after 2 years and got into bodybuilding, and was just soaking up all the human nutrition and exercise physiology and biomechanics and biochemistry and microbiology courses I was taking, more because I really liked, the world of everything from supplements to training, to periodization, to programming, to getting the most out of the human body, and then eventually the human brain and psyche. And so wound up with a master's degree along with a full pre-med curriculum, and was very interested in becoming a physician. I actually got accepted to a variety of medical schools in the U.S., and decided, because I didn't get accepted into some of the bigger ones, that I really wanted to attend. Maybe it was a little bit of pride on my part, but I wanted to, go to Duke is one I was particularly interested in, because I'd worked quite a bit there in their sports medicine department. I was interested in Harvard, Yale, the MD, PhD program at UPenn. But what I wound up doing instead was working in the private sector. I got offered a job after my master's degree that involved a good deal of money, and thought, well, this is a job that will allow me to work in the medical sector, make some money, talk to some doctors, improve my resume, make a better decision, and then go from there. And so I spent 4 months working in the private sector in hip and knee surgical sales, and I really got a bitter taste in my mouth for modern medicine during that time. None of the doctors, the sports medicine or the orthopedic physicians who I hung around with during that time, none of them encouraged me to go to medical school. In fact, they discouraged it. None of them seemed happy. The medical system seemed broken. I didn't enjoy hanging out at the hospitals or at the doctor's offices. It didn't seem quite like the life that I wanted to live. And so I quit that job after about 4 months. At that point, I had a pretty good resume. I'd moonlighted as a personal trainer for 4 years through college. I taught, tons of sports camps to kids and adults. I had a nutrition certification. I had, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a very long history of working with a wide range of clientele, and I was also this big, 210-pound bodybuilder, compared to the 175-pound athlete that I am now. And so I walked into a gym and asked for a job. And not only was I given a job, but within a couple of weeks, I was promoted to manager of the entire personal training program, and worked there for a couple of years, just basically training, group training, individual training, youth sports training. I actually got into triathlons at that point through my wife, who was an endurance athlete, who kind of introduced me to triathlons, and basically worked there for a couple of years. Then via a physician who I met there while training, branched out and started a series of exercise physiology and biomechanics clinics in which I'd partner with the local medical communities and kind of worked with two populations specifically. Folks who were trying to lose weight when nothing else was working. So we'd take them in and we'd analyze not just their exercise program, which is what all the other personal trainers were doing, but we'd also look at biochemistry, take the bloods. We would do indirect calorimetry. So we'd look at resting metabolic rate, exercise metabolic rate.
What year was that, just to get the timing right?
That would have been about 2007 through around 2009 or so.
All right, that was early on.
Doing those clinics, yeah. And I had a very, very successful business as a personal trainer, working with the local medical community. And also the other population I was doing quite a bit of work with via high-speed cameras, biomechanics, and then also like VO2 max testing, blood lactate testing, and coaching was the local like triathlete, marathoner, swimmer, cyclist, runner type of population, because obviously that, even compared to sports like baseball and football or soccer, for example, these are sports of attrition where having everything set up properly, because you're out there for hours and hours and hours, is pretty important. So you have to have your nutrition and your training kind of all set up. And a lot of times people who are doing these sports, right, like Ironman or marathon, they don't have, they're not part of a team necessarily, and in many cases don't have a coach, and so they rely on me as their trainer and as their physiologist and biomechanist to help them with everything from injuries to nutrition to training programs. In 2008, like towards the end of 2008, I was voted as America's top personal trainer by the National Strength Conditioning Association. And at that point, I'd already been kind of traveling the speaking circuit at different fitness conferences, teaching people how to run successful personal training businesses, like brick and mortar businesses. But when I received that nomination, not only did the demand for my speaking services go up, but so did my interest in things like publishing books, online programs. I saw a lot of people were affecting more lives and making more positive change by working with folks, through the internet. So I eventually, after being kind of inundated with requests for everything from, writing books to speaking, I realized I couldn't really do it all. My kids were born right around this time. They were twin baby boys, and I realized I couldn't spend my life at a gym and also hopping on airplanes, traveling around speaking, and also writing books. So I kind of I fired all my clients, or I guess more appropriately, I gave them to other personal trainers in the local community, and I quit coaching. I quit personal training, aside from doing some group clinics here and there, and I just moved into a full-time writing. I started a podcast, which still runs now, the Ben Greenfield Fitness Show, and doing a lot more researching along with my writing, and then also speaking, and a little bit of online consulting, which I also still do. I work with a lot of folks for like longevity, anti-aging. I work with a lot of CEOs, write out their exercise programs, keep track of their blood, their sleep, their heart rate variability, etc. But that's a pretty small number of people that I work with, and most of what I do is I write, and that's both freelance writing as well as writing for my blog or other people's websites, and then podcasting and speaking. And I've continued to compete too. Right now I race professionally as a Spartan obstacle racer, and before that, race both professional and on the amateur level in triathlon and Ironman triathlon, and I've dabbled in open water swimming and hunting competitions and free diving and a whole variety of little things along the way, because that's one of the things that I'm very, very bent on, is not being that guy who says, oh, the research says this, such as the research says that if you maintain high levels of blood ketones, then you're going to be able to exercise for long periods of time in the absence of exogenous sources of carbohydrates. Well, it's one thing to be a slightly overweight researcher / podcaster sitting behind your desk saying something like that. it's quite another thing to go jack yourself up on ketones and go do, say, like an Ironman triathlon or something like that. And so, I'm a big fan of not just studying this stuff, but also taking it out in the trenches and using myself as a guinea pig, testing and finding out what works and what doesn't when it comes down to the down and dirty in the trenches. And so I still do quite a bit of that as well.
May I ask you actually at this point, because you said you experiment a lot, when you were in your bodybuilding years, did you experiment a lot with supplements and also maybe with growth hormone, etc.? And why I ask is because this year, I know you were a speaker last year at the Bulletproof Conference, and I was speaking this year about a testosterone project I've done. And I've never tried exogenous testosterone, but have you?
No, because I always competed in tested sports and drug-free sports. So the things that I have not used because of that, exogenous testosterone, so patches, creams, lotions, etc., simply because there would be a lot of pie in my face if I ever did and if I were ever tested positive for something like that, because it's still considered cheating in most of the sports that I compete in. I could see a day where if I had like some time blocked out where I wasn't competing, where I would try some of that stuff, just again, as an N=1 experiment. But, unlike something like, say, melatonin, where the research goes back and forth at whether dosing, and especially microdosing with melatonin, research goes back and forth on whether or not it can shut down production of melatonin by the pituitary gland. But for the most part, it seems that small trace levels of melatonin, even on a daily basis, serves as a good anti-inflammatory and also a sleep enhancer. When we're talking about 0.3 milligrams, for example, of melatonin versus, say, 5+ milligrams you're going to find in a lot of tablets and supplements. So there doesn't appear to be a lot of exogenous disruption of melatonin production, or endogenous, production of melatonin when you take melatonin exogenously. But with testosterone, that doesn't seem to be the case. And, an experiment with exogenous testosterone, from everyone who I've spoken with who have used testosterone, once you cycle off it, because I'm not convinced it's something I would want to stay on for life, you do spend several months with suppressed libido, suppressed motivation, lack of drive, and kind of a host of nasty factors as your body has to relearn, how to produce its own luteinizing hormone and stimulate the Leydig cells in the testes to produce testosterone again. So that's one I haven't tried. I also have to be very careful with DHEA or any other growth hormone derivative, again, because of World Anti-Doping Association regulations. I even have to be careful with things like THC, and technically I have to go for more of like the cannabidiol derivative if I want to target, the anti-inflammatory or the relaxation benefits of like the endocannabinoid system. So ultimately, when I was a bodybuilder, to answer your question, I primarily did high protein, low fat, low carb, so very traditional bodybuilding diet, with a little bit of a carb load after weigh-ins to allow the muscles to fill out. I did just a basic creatine protocol. I still do creatine. I take 5 grams per day, 365 days per year, because since I was a bodybuilder, new research has come to light that loading and deloading phases are relatively unnecessary. But I would do, for example, a 20 gram a day loading phase for a couple of weeks going into a training cycle, and then maintain at 5 to 10 grams per day of creatine. It was an affordable supplement for me. I did a little bit of
creatine monohydrate?
Yeah, just a basic creatine monohydrate. Yep. There's a newer form of creatine, very similar to monohydrate, but a little bit better absorbed, called Creapure, that's made now. There are some supplement companies now using that particular form of creatine, the Creapure form. But, when I was a bodybuilder, just basic creatine monohydrate, wherever I could get the best deal on it. Nitric oxide, I actually did some of my master's studies on nitric oxide in my biochemistry course, and I would use nitric oxide quite a bit, especially for like a competition pump or an on-stage pump. A lot of bodybuilders will use like dark chocolate and red wine backstage still nowadays because of the vasodilatory benefits. But nitric oxide has both the ergogenic benefits as well as the vasodilatory benefits. That was an expensive one. Kind of the most popular supplement when I was bodybuilding was NO Explode, which still is pretty popular. But that's one that I would use. And and then just basically ungodly amounts of central nervous system stimulants, everything from Red Bull to Redline to Monster to to Jacked to ephedra, you name it, simply because when I was a bodybuilder, and a student taking 20 to 25 credits a semester, moonlighting as a personal trainer, working at different labs at the university, and then also bodybuilding, I'm sleeping 5 hours a night, and to get through 2 to 4 hours of training a day, coffee doesn't quite cut it. So those are some of my major supplements when I was bodybuilding, and most of that, frankly, was inflammatory, acidic, unhealthy, tough on the kidneys, tough on nitrogenous waste buildup, tough on the adrenals. It's not necessarily a healthy sport, bodybuilding. If I could go back and do it again, I'd probably choose...
That would be my question right now.
Yeah.
What would you do different?
Yeah, I would do a similar training program. I tend to, if you look at like anthropometric measurements, I tend to be a little bit ectomesomorphic, which means I am a lean muscular guy. And because of that, full body splits work better than body part splits for me. And what I mean by that is, rather than a traditional bodybuilding approach of, say, chest and shoulders on Monday, bis and tris and abs on Tuesday, legs on Wednesday, recovery day on Thursday, like a 3-day body part split, I instead would do the same that I did back then to pile on tons of muscle, and that was 4 days a week, full body. So big multi-joint dynamic movements like clean and jerks and cleans and overhead press and some bench pressing, a lot of squatting, a lot of deadlifting. And then what I would do is I would take any body parts that would lag. Like for me, my calves are a perfect example. And I would have certain days of the week where I would just blast any lagging body parts, right? So if my calves were lagging, I would have 2 days of the week where, in addition to those 4 full body days, I would have a day or an end of a workout where I'd just blast the calves, or I'd blast the biceps, anything that seemed to be lagging from an aesthetic standpoint, because aesthetics and balance are very important when it comes to bodybuilding and getting judged well. And then
with blast, by the way, you mean just
like
fatigue, right? Total fatigue.
Yeah, like finishing up a full body workout and doing a triple, let's say for like the calves, doing a triple superset of standing calf raises, seated calf raises, and tiptoe lunges, right? So like 10 to 20 repetitions for each, which is more of a hypertrophy range, and going through that for 5, 6, 7 sets, that type of thing. So you'll spend an extra 20, 25 minutes after your 2-hour workout just working calves. That would be an example of like a blasting a body part after a workout. So that particular routine worked quite well. I would still do a full body routine, but I would probably choose a mass gain protocol, more similar to like a keto gains protocol, where you've got a little less inflammation, you've got a lot of caloric density from fats, you've got a lot more of the hormonal precursors necessary for testosterone and growth hormone and a lot of the things that are important for maintaining an anabolic state. But I would
for the listeners, that would mean not high protein, low fat, low carb, but actually high protein, high fat, low carb. Right?
Moderate protein, high fat, low carb. Moderate protein.
Yeah.
I wouldn't exceed 200 grams a day of protein, just because of the ammonia toxicity that can occur with that, and also the law of diminishing returns. Once you exceed about 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight, you don't see a lot of additional muscle gain. So, for a 200-pound athlete, that's still below 200 grams of protein. So, anyways, though, the other things that I do in addition to high fat, moderate protein, low carb is I would continue to use creatine. I would use a much higher amount of essential amino acids to maintain high blood levels of amino acids and an anabolic state, meaning like 10 grams of essential amino acids before training, 10 during, and then 10 after. I would also use, for growth hormone, colostrum. So at the time, I was just drinking a lot of milk, but unfortunately, especially in like pasteurized, homogenized milk, you get a lot of protein separated from fat globules, which makes the proteins a little bit more of an assailant to the immune system, because a lot of those proteins will pass undigested through the digestive tract. a lot of them can wind up in the bloodstream and create some autoimmune issues. So I had to deal with a lot of like acne and issues related to both the insulin release as well as the immune response to undigested milk proteins, undigested dairy proteins. And because it can be difficult to get your hands on it and expensive to get your hands on high amounts of raw milk, I would do something like a colostrum supplementation to still get a lot of the growth factors and the growth hormone. I would do the 5 grams of creatine per day. Like I mentioned, I'd do the amino acids. Those would be the primary anabolic agents that I'd use. I'm not sure that I'd use nitric oxide. I don't know if that was the best use of my funds back then versus just doing like a lot of, arugula and beet juice and a lot of these nitric oxide precursors that seem to give a relatively comparable effect. I definitely take nitric oxide prior to competition, like prior to posing and stuff like that. But I don't know if I'd use it as often as I was using it back then because frankly, it gives you a good pump. Like you look good at the gym. If you're training at a gym where you're going to be competing against other people at the gym, there can be a little bit of an intimidation factor, right? If you're all vascular from the nitric oxide. But compared to even something like creatine, I don't know that you get a lot more reps or a lot better, higher quality
Lasting
training.
effect.
Yeah, other than just the aesthetic. Like it gives you a great beach body because you're all vascular and everything, but I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a huge payoff because it still is a relatively expensive supplement. And you can get a bunch of beets for literally nickels and juice those and get a similar effect. Those are some of the main things that I would do differently if I was bodybuilding. I would also, not that I would do bodybuilding, but if I were to go back, I'd definitely spend a lot more time in recovery. I wouldn't use as many central nervous system stimulants as I would like adaptogens. So things like ashwagandha, eleuthero, ginkgo biloba, yerba mate, some of the things that aren't quite as harsh, as say like ephedra when it comes to central nervous system stimulation, but that still give you a little bit of a pick-me-up in terms of energy. Even some of these things that have been shown to increase perfusion to the blood or perfusion to the brain, in issues of like concussion or traumatic brain injury, like lion's mane or vinpocetine or some of these things that they'll use now for Alzheimer's or for concussed football players. Those also can have a pretty good wakefulness and cognitive performance enhancing effect, even for athletes who are trying to like get themselves psyched up for a workout without the same adrenal exhaustion that you might face with overuse of something like caffeine or ephedra.
Do you use any either medium chain triglycerides or other keto products, exogenous ketones?
Sure. Well, I mean, the form of fatty acids, the medium chain triglyceride that is most easily converted into ketones and most easily utilized by neuronal cells would be C8. And so an example of that would be like brain octane, which is made by Dave Asprey's company Bulletproof. And so that's what I use. That's up in my cupboard right now. Rather than medium chain triglyceride, I simply have C8, which is brain octane. And then I also, just for the flavor aspect, I do have coconut oil. And like I just recently published on my website, there's a lot of recent research on the inflammatory effect of coconut oil once you exceed about 2 tablespoons per day. And we could extrapolate a lot of those effects to like a regular MCT, not necessarily an MCT that's comprised purely of C8, but just like a blend, your C6, your C8, your C10. And that
we put that in the show notes. That's great.
Yeah,
great
that
info.
can be mitigated through the use of butyrate and short-chain fatty acids. So if you're using a lot of coconut oil and MCTs, it would benefit you not only to include high amounts of plant-based fiber in the diet, but also either like a butyrate capsule or, with butter. See, vegetable intake is going to assist with your own production of butyrate as well as your production of short-chain fatty acids. The issue with butter is some people will try to get all their butyrate through that, and that can actually increase triglycerides quite significantly, and it can raise your triglyceride to HDL ratio, which can be a risk factor for coronary heart disease. It's a bigger risk factor than say like LDL. Is your HDL to triglyceride ratio. So I'm careful with butter. It's not that I totally don't use it, but I'm not like a stick of butter a day kind of guy. I'll use a maximum of about a tablespoon or so of butter, just because the butyrate from the butter can help out with fighting off some of the inflammation that is a potential from coconut oil. But at the same time, it's not, in my opinion, or shouldn't be your sole source of butyrate versus using like plant-based fibers.
All right. Actually, jumping back one step, because I'd be really interested in your opinion on raising testosterone naturally. Like, other than diet, do you have any specific advice, tips that what people could do to raise their hormone levels, like testosterone?
Well, most of it's like obvious and kind of stupid, right? Sleep, lift heavy stuff, sprint, right? Like those are the big three that have actually been shown in research to increase testosterone, and for the first one, sleeping, also increasing growth hormone and DHEA. So sleep, lift heavy stuff, sprint. The other biggies that I find tend to fly under the radar, people who are like taking whatever, tribulus and stinging nettles and all this stuff that, the research goes back and forth on. The biggest ones that have been proven in research to increase testosterone are if deficient, okay, so this is important. It's not necessarily in a case where you have adequate levels, but if deficient, zinc and magnesium can increase testosterone if you have a zinc or magnesium deficiency. The same can be said for vitamin D. Vitamin D can increase testosterone, and even in the absence of deficiency, it appears that higher dose vitamin D, like 6 to 10,000 international units, can increase testosterone, but vitamin D can pull calcium into the bloodstream, so you need to be careful with excessive calcification if that occurs. I'm a huge fan of sunlight to get, a more natural form of vitamin D, but if you do take a high amount of vitamin D, you'd want about 150 to 200 micrograms per day of vitamin K. Your body can produce a decent amount through the use of fermented foods, probiotics, things like that, but I'd recommend a vitamin K source if you're going to go over and above in terms of vitamin D supplementation. Creatine also has been shown to increase testosterone levels, so that would be another one. It's potentially through a glycogen-sparing effect, potentially through some other anabolic effect, I don't know, but creatine would be another. But if you look, if you look at, say, like a testosterone increasing supplement, a lot of times you'll see all these herbs, but really the proven stuff would be zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, creatine. Those are the biggies. There's one other. There's a fifth that actually has research behind it. I don't remember if it's boron. I want to say it was boron, but I don't want to be misquoted.
We look it up and then we put it correctly in the show notes. But
yeah,
there's a fifth one.
Yeah, and the reason I'm saying this is like I'm very interested in actually developing a testosterone enhancing product, like a supplement, but so many of them contain unproven ingredients and herbs that do indeed increase libido. Okay, so if you take pine pollen and tribulus and stinging nettles and some of these things that you'll find in a testosterone enhancing product, and you take those 30 minutes to 2 hours prior to sex, men are going to be harder. Women a lot of times will have better orgasms due to increased blood flow, but you don't actually see an increase in testosterone production. And some of these other things like vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, creatine, etc., those don't necessarily have an impact on libido or on sexual performance, but they do have an impact on testosterone. So there are some potential longevity benefits, etc. So I would like to at some point produce a testosterone enhancing supplement that's simply just the proven stuff and leaves out all like the sexy herbs and stuff like that.
How about Tomcat? I recently came across Tomcat Ally. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right.
Yeah, again, not a lot of strong research on it.
I see. Wow. Okay, this is a lot of great knowledge. Actually, I want to hit on one more topic, because going back to your life story, I mean, some things that really stick out is a tremendous amount of energy, and I think you still manage to focus. So you get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah,
and
if I could interrupt you,
yeah, go ahead.
And I don't want to sound like an asshole, but what you said right now annoys me, because I think that most people cop out. Most people drop down to the lowest common denominator. I think it's one of the problems with our modern educational system of having all the kids in one classroom and all the children are learning at a speed that's typically the speed of the slowest learner in the classroom. We look around us in the world of social media, movies, Hollywood, etc. And we have a certain expectation of what we're capable of based on what we see. And then we'll look at, you'll use me as an example and you say, hey, you have a tremendous amount of energy. No, I don't. I have a normal amount of energy, right?
All
I just
right.
have the normal amount of energy that any human being should have. Normal amount of intelligence, normal amount of drive, normal amount of motivation. It's just, we live in an era of such low expectations, such low expectations. I posted a photo the other day on Facebook of my kids headed out to the pool in their underwear and bare feet, walking through 5 feet of snow out to the 55-degree cold pool
Ben, if
to
I
do
may
their morning
interrupt you real
cold
quick, I
soak.
think your
And a lot of
microphone
people were
is.
like, "Oh, those kids are beasts." If only my children would have the courage to go do something like that. Any kid can do that. It's not like my kids are unordinary. It's simply that I've realized that the human body is born with a certain capability, and as long as you don't forget that you have that capability, anybody can do that. I'm not special, is what I'm saying. And
I love that.
I just
No.
want to make sure that people know that you don't have to be born a certain way in order to have high levels of energy or motivation or drive or anything like that. All it takes is acknowledging to yourself that you are going to ignore societal expectations of what is normal and instead go for what you want to be normal.
Yeah, no, you know what? I love your take, and I didn't mean to single you out as someone who is sort of um, genetically different, but I think that you do a lot of things correctly, and you've come across methods that help you, I think, to increase the flow time. Because actually, one topic also, and that's what I was leading into, is that unfortunately, very few people experience regular flow. And with flow, I mean that state where really, the ego vanishes, the prefrontal cortex shuts off, and where you just become involved in the activity that you do with your surroundings, and you're in the flow. And this is actually now based on research by Stephen Kotler, that people that experience more flow experience more bliss and satisfaction and happiness in life.
Yeah.
So do you have specific triggers that you do on a daily basis in order to increase the flow state?
Yeah, I do. And what I find is that flow seems to be intimately connected to breath, meaning that if I measure respiratory rate and I fall anywhere from 8 to 12 beats per minute on respiratory rate, my heart rate variability is very high. My sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system scores, when I measure heart rate variability, they tend to have a ratio that's very close to 1. And then I also just have better focus, less stress, all that woo-woo qualitative stuff that we tend to associate with being in a flow state. And so every day for me starts with a very intense focus on breath, because if I can set up breath properly at the beginning of the day, that will stick with me for most of the day. So how do I achieve that? In the morning, I wake up, I put on a heart rate variability monitor, and I measure heart rate variability for 5 minutes while I sit in bed and breathe. During that time, I journal, I read the Bible, and I simply sit, nice and tight for about 5 minutes, just breathing, so I don't jump out of bed. After I finish journaling and reading, I'll get out of bed, I go downstairs, and I have a specific 15-minute yoga routine that I do. And I'm very, very much focused on the breathing just as much as the movements. Deep breath in, go to the next pose, deep breath in, next pose. As I'm doing that, I'll typically have some tea or some coffee on. I've already had a glass of water, had my morning supplements like, creatine, for example. And then what I'll do while I drink my coffee is I've already got that breathing pattern initiated, and I'll go through and check anything important for the day, read some articles, try and stay away from emails because those will suck you in. But just like the light stuff, right? Checking Facebook, reading some blog posts while I sip my coffee. After I have my coffee, I will use the restroom. Typically that takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And then I will go do something for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes that I would consider to be a workout, but a workout that involves the parasympathetic nervous system. It's typically more yoga, sauna, cold water swimming with breath holding, walking with breath holding, or pretty much anything that is not stressful. Once I've finished up all of that, that's typically about the first 60 to 90 minutes of my day spent just activating my parasympathetic nervous system, my breathing, and taking care of my body from an adrenal standpoint. That sets the standard for the rest of the day for me to be in a highly productive state of what I would definitely call this flow state.
Wow. Hey, this is really cool. And this already covered now my question about your morning routine, which is great.
There we go.
And actually, I know you, there's so much stuff we could talk about, and I hope to have you back for one session. I know you have to run at some point. But maybe I have one more question, because you
Sure.
quickly mentioned it, and I know you're very knowledgeable about the benefits of sauna.
Yeah.
And I know you've done it with Teemu now, I think in Finland for the Biohacker Summit. And can you tell me why actually does it make sense to go regularly to the sauna? And how often should you go?
Sure. I go almost every day. The study that was done on Finnish longevity was done on folks visiting the sauna about 4 to 5 days a week. I've done a pretty extensive podcast on the benefits of heat with Dr. Rhonda Patrick, in which we discuss how the body not only experiences what you would expect for it to experience, improvement in cardiovascular efficiency and nitric oxide, for example, or increased stress resilience, increased cardiorespiratory efficiency from moving blood around the body, but also some things that tend to fly under the radar. Production of heat shock proteins, which can assist the body with stress resilience, and also can cause an improvement in the ability to be able to fight off infections and improves the strength of the immune system. You get a detoxification effect, primarily of metals, through sweat, through the skin. One of the body's detoxification organs, not quite as big as the liver or the kidneys, but a detox organ nonetheless. You get an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, so you get better neuronal connectivity in the brain. You get there's a couple of other things from a tissue standpoint. If you use, for example, infrared sauna, which I know is a blasphemous in Finland, but I still see some of its benefits. Improvement in tissue health, and even a reduction in symptoms of arthritis and inflammation, more so with infrared than with dry sauna. And then also you get a release of growth hormone, interestingly, with the use of sauna. So there's a lot of cool benefits. One thing I'd caution folks about, and the last thing I'd say about sauna, would be a lot of these wet saunas that many gyms will have. You do need to be careful with those, because the steam used in those does not necessarily pass through a water filtration system. So a lot of times you're breathing in steamed chlorine or steamed fluoride, and you do need to be careful with wet sauna. Mold and fungus tend to be bigger issues in those as well. But a dry sauna or an infrared sauna practice is, I believe, a very, very essential part of longevity. So I'm a big fan.
Wow, yeah, have you ever actually tried the public sauna in Helsinki?
Oh, yeah, sure. I first got into sauna when I would visit Japan to do triathlons over there, and I would frequent the public saunas over there, the ones they have in like malls and airports. They have the cold soak, they have the sauna, hot pool, warm pool, etc. And when I was in Finland, I did a few of those public saunas as well. One particularly nice traditional smoke sauna next to the Baltic Sea, so I got to do a little bit of cold-hot contrast with that one.
Yeah, actually, I tried one of those as well, and I was really thrown off when one guy tried to beat me with a stick, and then I was introduced to that through that.
Yeah.
Which is helping with your circulation, I think, and it's common in Russia as well.
Yeah.
Wow, Ben, thank you so much for all this information. This is fantastic content.
Yeah, no problem. I got about 2.5 miles of walking in while we were talking as well. So.
Yeah, actually, this could be the last question, because people are probably wondering, the ones who are watching, Is this workout related, or does it help you think? What is this about the running while you're talking?
Well, I use a manual treadmill workstation just to stay metabolically active while I'm working. Just a form of movement. And frankly, if I walk for 6 miles during the day while I'm talking to clients on the phone or doing podcast recordings and stuff, I don't really have to do as much like running, because my body builds up a lot of endurance in the tiny hip and core and feet muscles. And so, I can just do like a high intensity interval training session at the end of the day and kind of forego any of that aerobic oxidative training, because frankly, I do it all day long while I'm working at a treadmill workstation. So it just gives me the ability to be able to go out and do some of these long, things like Kokoro or, Spartan races and stuff like that, and spend a lot of time on my feet without necessarily doing much running at all.
Fantastic. Ben, at this point, thank you very much. This is the end of another episode of The Flowgrade Show. Thank you very much for being with us today. And if you want to find out more about the methods to turn into a fat-burning machine, to build lean muscle, to increase testosterone levels naturally, then make sure to go on flowgrade.com, sign up for the newsletter, like us, subscribe to us, follow us, and you will get a lot more. Until next time, stay Flowgrade.